they're dinosaurs, but I'm not a music elementary teacher anymore, so like, still right. But if I had,
Okay, very possible.
All right, so 5:45, we'll call the meeting to order and start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson,
Here.
Mark Hillman, Angie Skillings,
Here.
Carl Palmer, Abe Smith,
Here.
Dominique Stewart,
Here.
Amber Kirsting,
Here.
Rachel Henderson,
Here.
Dale Dolkey.
Here.
Yeah, something froze up, sorry.
All right, well, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'm having some sinus issues. The school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Do we have any revisions to the agenda order? Seeing none, we'll move on to recommendations and commendations. Next, Dale.
I get the honors today to present some awards to some high school students who've been valuable volunteers at the middle school. I'd like the following people to come forward if they are here. Jasmine Blanks, Grace Edinburgh, Maddie Horvath, Josie Dalzell, Noah Anderson, Andrea Phillips, Allison Dickman, Bethany Swallow, there, sorry, Kaylin Fisher. Did I call Jasmine? This award says, we recognize the following students for their outstanding commitment to the sport of swimming, but more importantly, their commitment to teaching students. These MHS students have volunteered to help coach and teach 60 middle school girls and 25 middle school boys over the past 2 seasons. These high school students have learned ways to impart their knowledge of swim techniques and growing wisdom of being high school athletes and competitive swimmers. As a retired coach, I want to tell you how valuable your contribution is to those middle school students. That really helps promote an excellent program. Let's see, Jasmine, Grace, Maddie, Josie, Noah, Andrea, Allison, Bethany, and Caleb. Very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Dale, and thank you, students. Glad you could make it here tonight, and thanks for all of your work. All right, up next we have community communications. This is a time to air concerns and express your opinions on issues. There should be no negative personal attacks against any individual, including staff, board members, or administrators. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, or viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the policies of the SCMA. We have 3 tonight, and first up is Stephanie May. Please come forward, state your residence, and you have 3 minutes. And hi.
Perfect.
Okay. My name is Stephanie May. I live in Stanton Township. And this is what I wrote, and I'm going to read it because I'm speaking from I want to thank the SDMA librarians for continuing to maintain a diverse collection of reading material for their students. Maintaining that diversity has met some challenges, but the SDMA school libraries have weathered some extreme criticism. In my opinion, a lot of folks living in the school district have noticed and are very grateful for all efforts to maintain a diverse collection. Diversity is a widely used word, but I'm specifically grateful for library material pertaining to LGBTQ subjects. These are closest to my heart since I am part of that community. And I'm going to give you my top 5 reasons for maintaining a collection which includes LGBTQ material. If you want LGBTQ students to become lifelong learners, then they need to find reading material that is reflective of themselves. If you want LGBTQ students to read for pleasure, then they need to find LGBTQ subjects in the collection. If you want LGBTQ students to become informed decision makers, they need to have access to material regarding LGBTQ matters. LGBTQ students are a vulnerable subpopulation. They are exposed to a constant stream of negative information from national and international media. The library is a place where they are welcomed and can find positive images about themselves. Number 5, students' mental health crises. One way to help LGBTQ students suffering with mental health is to offer them LGBTQ reading material with positive messages. These positive messages can help counter the overwhelming negative images coming at them on national and international media outlets. Thank you so much for your willingness to support a diverse collection while defending yourselves against sharp criticism from a vocal minority opposed to LGBTQ inclusive library material. Can I turn this in?
That'd be great. We have
Okay.
just watch your stuff there. We can add it to the record.
Perfect. Thanks much.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Joyce Uller.
Oh, Josie's going to pass this out to me. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Great. Joyce Euler, vocal minority. For the last few meetings, I have been talking about this book. Okay. And the issue as I see it, though, is not really getting rid of this book. There are so many books in this world. The Library of Congress has at least 25 million, maybe 45 million. And you have very limited space in your libraries. So the issue here is that someone on your payroll selected this book from all the books that could take up that shelf space. Somebody chose it. Why? And that's a rhetorical question, unlike my usual. Thank you for answering a lot of my questions lately. As bad as I feel this book is for our children, it is actually a dead canary in a coal mine. So the chart that Josie's passing out here was put together after hours of research by Moms for Liberty group in Tennessee. And it shows some probably not all organizations on an international level, all the way down to a school level, little clubs there. All of them exerting various forces on school districts behind the scenes. So on Thursday, June 1st, Dunn County Education Alternatives will be starting a video series on some big issues weighing down on schools. This first topic that we're going to address is what is critical race theory. And I'll be putting that event together, I'll be presenting it. I am personally inviting all of you. The event is free. Anyone who wants to come and watch the videos with their fellow community members as we all learn about the topic is invited and welcome. And if you are more comfortable, there's a link on that flyer, and you can watch the videos at home as well as viewing resource materials on topics there. So I hope that you will keep that coming. A second quick topic here is thank you to Mr. Seglin for providing information in today's meeting about how books are selected for the libraries. Looking at this document here, under families may restrict for their child, I'm quoting, families have the right to restrict reading materials for their under 18 student. Library staff cannot possibly read every single book or know what may be considered objectionable by every single person. Library staff will help to ensure your student is making choices you allow, unquote. So during your presentation today, Mr. Seglin, I hope you will give specifics
on how that works. Is there a form a parent can fill out restricting student access to word explicit material? And since the students have access to so much materials digitally, how would a librarian know if the student was accessing that? It would be nice if there was a form or a process by which parents could opt out of sexually explicit materials for their children. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Josie Pillman.
My name is Josie Pillman. My address is 235 3rd Avenue East in Knapp. And that's part of the school district here. So, Dr. Zadowski and members of the board, thank you for letting me chat today, talk. Dunn County Education Alternatives study topic for the month of June, as Joyce said, is critical race theory, also known as CRT. Does this affect us in the SDMA? You may have critical race theory in your schools if you hear words like diversity, equity, and inclusion training, anti-racism initiatives, racial sensitivity sessions, racial healing, socially critical self-awareness, anti-bias training, culturally responsive practices, critical ethnic studies, critical pedagogy, free radical therapy, free radical self-care, free radical collective care, action civics. You may have CRT in your schools if you hear words like white supremacy, systematic racism, white privilege, anti-racism, white fragility, intersectional identities, internalized racism, white social capital, colorism, interrupting racism, racialized identity, microaggressions, abolitionist teachings, spirit murdering, land acknowledgement. On June 1st, as Joyce said, the community discussion begins. Please come, you're all invited and it's free.
Thank you. Didn't get to test my timer usage today. Okay. All right, moving on to our personnel consent agenda. We have a couple of resignations and a couple of new hires. Do we have a motion to approve? So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Dominique, second by Amber. Any discussion?
I just have a question. Are we not accepting resignation of the Director of Activities?
Not tonight.
Thank you.
We anticipate that we'll see that soon, though.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Let's go. And the motion passes 9-0.
Just to follow up on Amy's question, and I appreciate the question, Amy. For anybody who hasn't heard, Mr. Mirren, the Director of Activities and Athletics for the school district, he has agreed in principle to take a different position. He did provide us with notice contingent upon the finalization of his work agreement with his new position. So that we felt was enough to go ahead and post the position and start the process since we're approaching summer. But until that hire is completed, we didn't think it was appropriate to bring to the board. But we do anticipate that to happen, but that's why it's not on this agenda. You're welcome.
Thanks for that context. Moving on to the action agenda, we have a single item to approve revisions to the summer school pay structure.
So moved, Jane. Second.
Right, moved by Abe, second by Dale. Do you want to give a little explanation here?
Sure. The board already approved the 2023-2004 summer school pay structure. With working through the business office and the rest of the offices in the ASC. We found a few editorial issues that needed to be cleaned up. That's why we brought it forward to make sure that it's formally approved. It's pretty minor in detail, but it keeps the practices that have been longstanding in the school district for how the summer school pay structure aligns with the regular school year pay structure. So we are recommending approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? If there's none, then let's vote. Motion passes 7-0. I just realized I said 9-0 last time.
Oh. We'll make
Yeah, it's not, there's not 9 votes. All right, on to the discussion items. First up, we have our SBMA library report.
So as the board knows, we've heard concerns and questions about the school libraries really throughout the whole year. And I really appreciate the work that Mr. Segman and also our school librarians, Jessica Graham and Kim Navarro, have done. It's been a work in progress, and I'm really proud of the work that our professionals have done. And after working together and collaborating, they've been able to bring forward some infographics and also some information to help share with our board, with our community, how the libraries operate. I do think there's some pretty big misconceptions out there, and hopefully this will help address those misconceptions. But with that being said, Brian, go ahead and take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the time to talk about any of our programs, and the library is no exception to that. A little bit of context, so selection of materials for library media centers sometimes comes up as to what is the criteria or process that is used, and the library, much like our other instructional programs, will utilize the steps that are outlined in policy 361, which is educational material selection and evaluation. And the board over the last couple of years has had a chance to take a look at that, and most recently that policy was updated in April of 2022. So a fairly recent review of that policy took place at a board level. And then moving on, under that policy, the direction for that is delegated to our trained library media staff. And there are several things that will take place in alignment with that policy that will lead to the selection of materials and the evaluation as it works its way through. But one of the things that we learned as we went through the development of our library media plan that the board reviewed and approved back in December of 2022 was, while we have a policy that outlines that process, and internally we know that process, what we found is we probably could have done a better job communicating to our public how that process works. So in conversation with our library media staff, with Ms. Navarro and Ms. Graham, the decision was made to go through and create some guiding documents that would be more public-facing and probably easier to interpret by the general public as a whole, that we could post in our libraries as well as on our district website. So included in your background and as well as the public content are the two infographics that outline both how students access materials within the library, because sometimes that is a question that our staff will receive, but then also an infographic that walks through the selection, evaluation, and reconsideration of materials in our libraries. Because we know that not every book might not be right for every student, so what does that process look like? But also recognizing that student choice in the library is an important piece as well. So through discussion, taking a look at our policies, what that would look like, our staff came up with this, and I think it does a very nice job of capturing what's included in policy that is reflected in practice on a day in and day out basis. And then in addition, as we went through that process, I wanted to spend a little bit of time just touching on how students then access materials in the library. And really, it starts with, could start with students walking through what's available in the physical collection, but also searching our online database, which references both our physical collection, but also our digital collection, so that students can select materials that are in their home schools, but also request from other schools if a title is not available within our district. So an elementary student, for example, I have a 4th grade student, she goes into the library at Oaklawn, and she sees a title that she would like to read, but it's not physically present on the shelf at Oaklawn, but it's physically present at River Heights. There's a process for her to request that, and it will be transferred over, and then she can bring that physical book home. She could potentially look and request a book that, or look and see a title of a book that might be at a middle school or a high school if she keys in the correct term, but if it's not suitable for her grade level range, that is not something she would be able to physically check out, would not be able to be sent to her school if it's not for that range. And then digital resources also come into play. We utilize a system that is referred to as Sora, and that houses our digital content, our ebooks, and follows a very similar process. Now, obviously that book is not physically present, it's a digital copy. So if they're going to select from a digital library, same type of rules apply. There will be access levels based off of the grade level and the age level that a student is in. So likewise, a student may see a title that they can go in, they can check out, they can read. They may see a title that is not something that has been identified for their level, and they would not be able to check that book out. We do have times where parents do request that certain content not be available to their students. And our current process for that is generally one that starts with a conversation with the child's classroom teacher or the building level library staff. And they can put a restriction on that child's account to either restrict a specific title or to restrict access to things beyond a certain grade level if necessary or if desired. So real quick overview, but again, those infographic documents that Mrs. Navarro and Ms. Graham worked on creating are things that as we roll forward into finalizing out this year and going into next school year, you'll see accessible on our website, but also physically posted in each of our libraries to help explain that process. And we've talked previously about process that if an individual wishes to have a book reconsidered, what that process looks like. And I would say that from our experience, we have a pretty straightforward process when it comes to that. So with that, I do have both Ms. Navarro and Ms. Graham here on behalf of the library to answer any questions that we might have this morning.
What if there's a student who's quite a voracious reader? I had 2 in my house. Well, there's actually 4 of us. But my 2 stepdaughters, they graduated both from Menomonie, and they were voracious readers. They were probably reading at 6th or 7th grade level, at 1st or 2nd grade. So I guess I'm wondering, does that mean that a parent would have to say, if they're, like students in 3rd grade and they're reading at 8th grade level, does that mean that the student would have to have their parent override the system by coming to the teacher and or the librarian and saying it's okay for this child or my child to have this book?
Well, I'll start that, and then I'm also going to ask both Kim and Jess to weigh in. So, generally speaking, when we have a student who, is regardless of their level, the conversation would start with the classroom teacher. But our collections are very wide, and I know we spent time working on ensuring that there are lots of options available to students And typically there's a great range that would be available for them, but
Keep pulling,
Generally, we don't, we try to be very careful about the whole age appropriateness. I mean, we are dealing with children, so I do try to be very careful, and I know Jessica does when she's researching the books. If you do have a child that is a voracious reader and is, you know, academically they can read more, it's not a problem, as long as if, you know, a parent could come to the teacher, and the teacher and I, or Jessica, usually have a conversation, for sure. It's not a problem to get books to them. The only issue is if they are in 3rd grade, sometimes the content, even though they can read well, is not going to be anything that they would get interested in. So their life experience might kind of make up for that with reading. But we do have a ton of books. We have a lot. We have books that are above grade level, that are 5th grade, 4th grade appropriate. So, I mean, it would just be a conversation. It would be a case-by-case thing. But we wouldn't deny a book to a child, especially if a parent comes in and is asking for, you know, more choices. Does that answer your question?
Yes, very much, thank you.
Go ahead.
How is it how are the age appropriateness of books determined? Who determines that? Does that come in from the publisher, or where are you getting the levels from?
A lot of things. I do a lot of reviews. I know Kirkus, School Library Journal, our sellers also have a publisher. They'll say, you know, audience and also interest as well. So I try to be very, very careful about having books that are meant for 9th and 12th, only being at the high school. I do that because of the environment that we are in right now, being very under the microscope. I try to be very careful about what I do put in my libraries. So if it is not considered appropriate for any grade level, then we just make them late, basically. So we just go ahead.
Just to piggyback off of that, the publishers often give an approximate age range or grade level range, and we do use that as a guide too.
I just want to say thank you to yourselves and all the library staff. I think a library in a school is an amazing thing because it's one place where all the students come through, and whatever subject they're studying, whatever subject they're interested in, that's the place they can build on and pursue their interests. I was also a voracious reader as a kid, right? Although maybe until an older age than any of these kids. But I think that I really appreciate the efforts you go through to make sure that kids can find reading material, get a lifelong love of learning. It's a lot of alliteration there. And really, you know, use it as a way to explore the world around them. I think that's really amazing. And just thank you for all your effort. I know it's a very hard job. I know that having some librarians, you know, as friends long ago, the amount of things you have to keep track of and think about and reconsider and analyze in terms of subject appropriateness, how you're going to organize the space so that people can find what they need to find, how you're going to move classes through. It's a huge amount of work. Teaching, indexing, just thinking about the process is amazing. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you for both of these, the work you've put into these, like, I don't know if I want to call them posters. Thank you, graphics, yes. Because I feel like they're very clear, and they are a great resource for the public. I also appreciate what you do. The library was one of the few places for me where I got to read about people who look like me. Like, I didn't get to see that very much. I certainly didn't see it from my teachers, and a lot of my dad's family doesn't live around here. So the library is a very special place for me. So I really appreciate the work you guys do. Thank you.
Are the infographics on the website yet?
They are not posted yet. We're waiting until after we did this presentation this evening to get them.
So for anybody who wants to see them, they are available on board docs. I know not a lot of people go to board docs, but for anybody who regularly follows the board, you can find them there. Otherwise, probably by the end of the day tomorrow, they'll be posted on the district website under the library portion. Again, two infographics on how students can access library materials within the SDMA, and then the other one, selection, evaluation, and reconsideration of SDMA library books.
One more remark on the infographic. I think it's particularly well organized because it really lays out a couple of key principles in a very clear way, right? One is that everyone needs access to books. They need to find books that interest them. And that there are professional standards for what's appropriate based on educational levels and reading ability and so on, and that's your expertise. And there's still, on top of that, the question of what families want for their own kids. And each of us as parents, as families, can make those decisions for ourselves, but we can't decide for someone else. And it's the library's job to be there for everyone. I think that's a really key point.
I agree.
I agree with everything that's been said. I also want to thank you. I have 2 elementary school students, and they check out their maximum books every single week, and they do read them. And I love that in addition to having that access and having the lessons that they get in their library time every week, they're engaging with a staff member who loves to talk to them about kids' literature, which I think is a really special relationship to have with an adult in their school. I had a question about Sora. Can you give us a little bit more of an idea about how students at different age levels use Sora, in that, like, are they using it from their school Chromebooks? Is there also an app? Can kids put it on their Kindles? Or do people use it from phones? Like, what are the ways in which they can access Sora?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. Sora is very versatile. So I have the app on my phone. The kids can get it on their Chromebooks, and you can get it anywhere.
But no matter how they're accessing it, those kind of age restrictions are in place. So, like, as a parent, if my kid is reading something on Sora, I can try to take a look at what it is, but also I can have the confidence in knowing that like what they have access to is limited to the age ranges.
Did you say you as a parent could look through it, or?
No, well, I just meant, like, if I know my kids are checking out books on Sora, I could grab their Kindle and see what it is. You know, like, it's not a physical book, I don't see it laying around, so, you know, what are my ways of knowing what they're reading on Sora, I guess?
You can be guaranteed that. It doesn't matter what device they're on, because it's under the Menomonie School District account. Those age restrictions would be in place.
Associated with their login.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
And I think that clarification is critically important, and I mentioned misconceptions. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we've received questions on this year, is that depending on how students search the system, they may be able to see a whole host of titles that they do not have access to. But again, depending on how they search and what they put in the computer will spit out, you know, all sorts of titles. But when the child requests a certain title, that's where the analysis comes into play and those restrictions come into play. So, you know, if you go, you know, I know Joyce and Josie have come to several board meetings and brought up some books that, you know, they might not feel as appropriate. Well, an elementary student might be able to see a title, one of those titles, but just because they can see the title in the catalog does not mean they can check it out. The checkout has to go through the librarians, and if it's not age appropriate, it's not allowed to be checked out. The request is denied. So the checks and balances are there, and hopefully that helps put that to bed.
Any additional questions or comments? Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here tonight. And thanks for your work on these infographics. Next item on our discussion agenda is a review of student parent handbooks for the 2023-2024 school year.
So board members, you've all had an opportunity to see the proposed changes. You can see that most of the changes are editorial in nature. I appreciate the work that the elementary, middle school, and high school principals put in to updating their handbooks. This is a first look at it. We will bring them back next meeting for your consideration. But are there any questions or comments tonight on the handbooks for next year?
I have one quick question about the Empowered Learning Handbook. There is no highlights in there indicating that there's changes. Is this whole handbook new? I can't remember, or is there just no changes?
It's not, the only changes are related to the insurance.
Okay.
Sorry for not highlighting.
Oh, no, it's okay. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion related to the handbook changes? All right. Next up is review of the transportation contract for 2023-24.
So Mark was not able to be here tonight, but he did collaborate on providing the board a summary of the meeting that we had with Menomonie Transportation. And it was really a nice meeting, and it was really actually fun to celebrate another successful year of our partnership with Menomonie Transportation. I can't say enough about Ryan and Kyle, how they have done a great job leading their company. Also, we know that Tom Krieger is very instrumental. He's been a real asset to us in the school district. In looking at the bus contract and in looking at inflationary figures and also the needs of the school district, a whole host of items were discussed. And what we'll be bringing to the board for consideration is a contract that's been agreed upon in principle. It includes an inflationary increase. It also includes an extension of the agreement, and it also includes our commitment to continue meeting on an annual basis to discuss transportation and our partnership with the company. So unless there's any questions, really that's the update. Mark did say that he'd be more than willing to take a phone call, not tonight, but before the next school board meeting. If any board members have any questions, I could do the same thing. Is there anything tonight?
I just have one question tonight. Is this the first time that we are looking at renewing the contract for a 5-year term?
We are looking at extending it. It's currently a 3-year term. And when we were talking about financing and the cost of new buses, Menomonie Transportation indicated that having a longer-term contract allows for them to get better financing for some of this very expensive equipment. It still would provide the board an opportunity to stop that contract from extending, but having a longer commitment, I guess it's easier on financing would be the biggest reason. Any other questions?
All right, next up, the preliminary budget for 2023-24.
So, board members, you all received a preliminary budget, and before she gets into it, I'd like to thank Leah and her entire team, and frankly, the entire administrative team who has really been working hard the last couple of weeks to try to give you the best guess that we can. When I say best guess, it really is a best guess. There's so much, and Leah, I apologize if I'm taking any of what you were planning to say, but we don't know what the state budget is going to be. It sounds like they'll start discussing the educational portion of the state budget in the next few weeks, but we are left to try to predict what the lawmakers will do in Madison. But I also want to say thank you to our staff members. The budgeting process is a very collaborative process. It really starts at the classroom level, through the buildings with our teachers and our staff, identifying their needs and then bringing it forward through their immediate supervisor. And then the budget builders are then submitted to Leah, and she is able to work that through with the administrative team and help us develop the budget. So it is a very big process. Unfortunately, I think as everyone is aware, finances for public schools are getting very difficult. The way that our state chose to fund education over the last 2 years especially, essentially leaving us with the federal COVID money and no new state money to operate, was sufficient for the past 2 years. However, it has left a huge gap, a fiscal cliff in how our state funds schools. Indications are that that cliff or that gap is not going to be filled with an addition of the high inflation that we've had. So we are looking at a very difficult situation. But Leah, go ahead, I'll turn it over to you and you can explain a little bit more about the specifics.
Okay, the document labeled 23-24 budget notes kind of breaks down the budget specifically by the different funds in a little more detail in the assumptions that we put into this budget. Like Joe said, the state has not approved the biennial budget yet, so these are assumptions. Built in right now is the projected revenue cap increase at $200 per pupil. Our 3-year rolling membership average is up. The estimated general state aid, we always estimate the same as we received in the previous year. And then the Fund 10 levy overall is showing a decrease. There's an increase in interest rates as those are up, so interest revenue, we're projecting an increase there. It includes decreases in a Department of Workforce Development Center Health Services grant. The per pupil categorical aid estimate is, I left that the same at $742 per pupil. There was an increase in library aid this year, and so we're anticipating that will increase for next year as well. It's looking like there will be a decrease in the mental health grant. Of course, the decreases in ESSER 2 and 3. And then Get Kids Ahead Initiative grant, that was a one-time grant we had received for the past 2 years. I don't expect that to renew. And then back to school aid, we received a one-time aid payment there last year, which we won't, I'm assuming, be receiving this year, and then a slight decrease in computer recycling costs. That covers the Fund 10 revenues. For Fund 10 expenses, the biggest would be the salary and benefit increases and staff changes, increases to health insurance, and then the other funds I have listed there all out separately. Does anybody have any questions regarding the notes?
Can you elaborate a little bit when I think I know what you mean, but when you say Fund 10 levy decrease, can you elaborate a little bit on what that means to homeowners, taxpayers, et cetera?
Again, this is preliminary, and the board will set the levy in the fall, but right now it's looking like a decrease on the mill rate. It would be a decrease of 0.72. So over what we've levied in the previous year, it's not a huge increase, but it is a slight decrease.
And if I understand correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the fact that it's decreasing is basically due to the revenue limit and how it interacts with property values?
I would say that's the most accurate way to describe it. We also have done a really good job of capturing as much state aid as possible. So whatever revenue that we're allowed to generate, capped by the revenue limit, that revenue comes from either state aid or the property tax levy. And as we continue to maximize our state aid, it's kind of a teeter-totter. If the state aid goes up, the levy goes down. And really a lot of that is a function of revenue caps being frozen for a number of years now. And if you go back, you'll see articles and headlines how the state has put millions of dollars more into education, when in fact, really, schools have been used as a pass-through, because even though more state dollars have been put into the state aid coffers, because revenue limits haven't been adjusted, schools have not been able to capture any of that new revenue. So essentially, it's been new revenue into the state aid formula, which then lowers taxes, which makes property taxpayers happy, but it doesn't give schools any spendable, new spendable revenue.
So overall, if you combine the general state aid and the levy decrease, that's basically representing an overall decrease in total state funds if you set aside ESSER and the other federal funds. Is that roughly speaking accurate, or?
Right now, yes, yeah. And, I think we need to be careful not to bury the headline. When we look, and Lee, I don't know, did you want to keep going, or do you want me to?
You could.
Okay. When we look at this right now, it is not good. Right now, it looks like expenses are going to be about $6 million more than revenue. Now, we do think that that is the worst case scenario. We don't want to not plan ahead. We're certainly hopeful that lawmakers will provide a reasonable increase for schools. But in the worst case scenario, it could be up to $6 million shortfall for next year. So we have been frantically working hard to figure out. Our budget in Menomonie has been a real point of pride for many years. We know that in many of the decisions that the board has made over the last 12 to 18 months, we knew that that was going to be difficult on the budget. A few things that stand out with our intervention programming. I think a lot of people, forget, this is only a few months ago, but we're committing to $1.2 million of intervention programming, academic intervention programming for our students who are still catching up from the pandemic, for our students who need extra service to get to grade level. And we're not talking about students with disabilities or students with special needs. We're talking about students who need that extra help with their academics to get caught up. That's $1.2 million. Then when we look at our staffing and we look at the cost of staffing, the teacher shortage, the board, I think, made really good decisions in terms of compensation for next year. It's helped us maintain a competitive atmosphere here with other schools in the area and across the state, but that was largely expensive too. And at that time, we talked about how more than likely, not figuring that the state was going to be able to, or they have a $7 billion surplus, but that they were unlikely to provide public schools with enough funding to combat inflation and fill the fiscal cliff. We figured that in in the spring of 2024, we're very likely heading towards referendum. Obviously, with these numbers, nothing has changed with that. As we go into next year, looking at these kinds of deficits, I think it's very important that, one, we continue to look at our expenses, and we have done this a long time, continue to look for ways to be efficient. And even though the board approved a staffing plan for next year, there are several positions that we are still waiting on enrollment figures. We are holding on some positions to make sure that we maintain the class sizes that are advised through board policy. We are not going to hire positions if we don't need them. We're going to try to stretch this COVID money as far as we can. The second round of COVID money needs to be spent really by the start of the school year, but the third round of COVID money can go for a whole another year. So if there's ways that we can stretch that out and help cushion the blow next year, we will. Also, I think we need to look at our capital planning. I think we've done a great job in recent years of contributing close to $1 million a year towards Fund 46, which is the fund that we have set up for future capital maintenance expenses. We have to make a decision in this year's budget before July 31st. Hopefully we'll know more from the state before then, but I don't know if I will be able to advise the board to make that contribution this year, knowing that we're going to have immediate needs in the next budget year. So, a couple other things that we're looking at, title funding, which goes into those academic interventions. We did get some good news that we're hoping that title funding will be a little higher next year, probably to the tune of $68,000. But again, that's only a small percentage of the deficit that we could be facing depending on what happens at the state level. So we do have a good fund balance. We do have a healthy fund balance. I'm not concerned in terms of operating next year. What concerns me though is that if we start looking at using fund balance to operate, using fund balance for recurring expenses, is a formula for disaster. Because those expenses will continue, the funding does not, and we would use up that fund balance very quickly. Also, our fund balance is in a healthy position where we are not forced to borrow, no short-term borrowing. But because we only receive our revenue at certain points during the school year, we need to maintain a sizable fund balance so that we can make payroll throughout the school year. And a lot of school districts, what they have to do if they don't have a sizable fund balance, they then need to borrow money either through a line of credit or through short-term borrowing. And with the way interest rates are starting to change, that's going to be just more dollars that go towards interest and not into the classroom. So our lead team has a really good plan for getting us through the next year, but there's going to have to be some big decisions by the board soon. The biggest decision probably be whether or not to go to referendum, what kind of referendum, when we go, and how much. And then the other piece would be is if a referendum does not fail, what do we do to balance the budget? And I surely hope we don't have to go down that road.
That was an excellent summary, thank you. Very clear and thought-provoking. I have one slightly detailed question about the ESSER funding. Just trying to tease apart one of the comments. It says in the commentary, this assumes all our remaining ESSER funding will be needed to balance this year's budget. Realistically, what do you see as the actual phase-out timeline for that money? And because we're in some sense using it as a bridge, let's say, or a way to transition over the next year. What do those timelines look like realistically?
Well, when the budget was approved for this year, we had planned to use all of the ESSER funds. We have had times though during the year that we've been able to do things efficiently. We've also had some things that were budgeted that we were able to achieve under budget. To give you a real clear answer this time, Abe, is very difficult. So I'm hesitant to put a number on it, but what I can tell you is that I'm pretty confident that we will be able to carry over some ESSER funding to help cushion the blow next year. But I can tell you it's not even going to be close to what it would take based on this preliminary budget.
Understood. And I think your point about the capital fund, that's those kind of, let's say, short-term choices of how to transfer, when to transfer, how much to transfer. That doesn't solve a structural problem, right? And it's not, again, the structural problem is not our fault. We're working really hard to be super efficient and use our money to the best of our students. But if the state budget does not come out significantly more favorable than it looks like it might, there's going to, we're kind of looking at this long horizon. We have to really think about that as an ongoing process, as opposed to, we can't just get through 6 months. It's really about a long-term planning process. And I know you're doing that, and I'm really proud of what you're doing.
Well, and I think it's important, thanks, Abe. I think it's important to realize, everyone needs to realize we're a school.
Right.
I could balance the budget in 5 minutes. All of us could. But, I mean, we're here to get kids to learn and to achieve academically. And the academic interventions, I believe, are one of the most easy to understand examples that we come up with. We could slash, over $1 million pretty easily, but the negative impact that would have on student achievement would be significant. And if we get to the point where we have to start reducing programming, there's going to have to be some very difficult decisions, and it really starts pitting values against each other, and all these values are competing values, which makes it so difficult, because if you reduce one, you're probably going to impact another as well. If the classroom teachers have to provide so much extra time for students that are currently getting extra services through intervention staffing and help, what's that going to do to the other students and student achievement as a whole? That's just one example. A lot of people think that it'd be really easy just to get rid of athletics or co-curricular activities or music or whatever that be. Well, as soon as you don't offer something in this type of environment, I don't even want to pick one sport or activity, but let's just think in your mind what your favorite sport or activity is. And if we eliminate that, it would only take a handful of students to open enroll to a different school district, and losing the revenue from those students is probably more impactful than the whole cost of that entire program for all the students. So it's a very difficult proposition, but I know we're up for the task. I know we're up for finding solutions. Again, I feel very confident that we can bridge, this for 1 year, and hopefully at that point, either the state will come forward with more funding, and/or our community will support additional funding so that we can continue to offer a comprehensive program here in the school district.
Thank you for that summary.
I was wondering if
Thank you for that summary. And I think-
Next step, Leah, the next step.
Yep,
I have one quick question about the budget notes, if I may. So Fund 27, special education funding, the assumption included in the budget is that the reimbursement rate will not increase in the coming budget, is that right? Is that 30% is where it's been?
Well, it's, yes and no. It's 30% on actual, but I'm projecting 30% on budget.
Okay.
So the actual funding is based on actual spending, right? And usually a conservative budget is higher than actual, so it is an increase.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was curious because I know that's another piece of the biennial budget that we're hoping for and not counting on, but.
And if you look at the budget estimate sheet on
Yes.
the Fund 27 transfer,
Uh-huh.
that has gone up. It's showing here 351,000 as an estimate for an increase.
Is a transfer from Fund 10?
Correct.
Okay. And then I had one more question on the notes about that. The last line says an increase due to migration from Fund 60. And you stumped me on that one. What's Fund 60?
Fund 60 was the student activity account.
Oh, okay.
That has gone away, but the expenditures, that was due to governmental accounting practices. We do not have a trust in Fund 60, and so that recommended by our auditors was to discontinue Fund 60 and move that into Fund 21, our gift donation account.
Oh.
And so their expenditures are higher than anticipated. They were this past year, and so I built in an increase for that.
Thank you.
Rachel and board members, I know that we're probably ready to move on, but I do think Rachel brought up a point that's critically important. The other issues at the state that I already talked about, another key component is the special education funding. And I know that there are proposals at the state level. I'm optimistic that we may see some movement there, but I don't think many people know how much funding we are transferring out of our general fund to special education services, because the reimbursement rates for special education expenses are not nearly what they need to be. So that's requiring us to move well over $1 million. I don't know the exact figure. Leah, I'm looking at you. I won't put you on the spot. We can have that for our next meeting, but it's significant. And so even though we're also watching how the revenue limit's going to change, there are some other proposals within the budget that will also have a significant impact one way or another. We're hopeful that it's going to help our funding for special education.
Now take it away.
We do anticipate that some of these assumptions will be changing in the next couple weeks, and so by our next June board meeting, we hope to have some of these numbers more firmed up by that time.
And then once the board gets this in June, the board will consider it, and whatever budget the board approves in June will then be forwarded on for the annual meeting with all of the posting requirements. The annual meeting will then be held in August. Hopefully by that time the state budget will be wrapped up, but we'll still have a lot of assumptions in August, and then by October, when the board actually approves the final budget and sets the levy, that's when we actually know what we'll have, even though the school year will be 2 months in.
something I hope we can do, both the admin team and as a board, is as we move toward the annual meeting in August, really think about how this information can be conveyed to the general public in a way that's really digestible. You know, we are, I think all of us, other than Leah and Joe, are kind of grappling with what these numbers, what these categories really mean and how to think about them. And we've been going to seminars and workshops and trying to learn these things as quickly as possible. And so, you know, thinking about how can the kind of the fix that we're in be understood in a way that kind of minimizes the complications and really gets to the core point, right, about how to use money and where it goes and where it comes from. And so, you know, I think that as we think through what the annual meeting is going to look like, it's going to be a pretty crucial one, because this is going to, you know, we're going to be talking about this numbers. They're going to vary, right? But numbers, you know, maybe roughly in these ballparks to the entire community. And so, making sure we really have a clearly laid out, you know, the sort of infographics shape for the library, for example, things that are really easy to digest and understand would be really helpful. So, you know, I think we can all collaborate on that in some sense, but just I recommend that we start that early.
And I guess what I would suggest is board members maybe go back to the previous annual meeting and look at the slides that were used. We've spent a lot of time over the years continuing to improve those slides to try to make it as understandable as possible. Certainly there will be new information on the slides, but if you see something that you think is missing or could be improved, if you could let us know sooner than later, that can help inform us as we're already beginning preparations for the annual meeting.
I just have a comment that I'd like to make, just kind of in general as to what you've all been talking about. Joe was talking about the $1.2 million for intervention. A lot of people will say, oh gosh, you know, schools, they just throw money at things and they don't work. That works. And so I just want to let you know that is really working. We've seen a lot of growth in students. And that's what our main job is, to make sure that our students are achieving at the highest potential. So I just want to make a plug for the dollars. And then if you consider our teachers and then wanting to have a good retention, that's really important as well, because that creates continuity as well as just better morale for all concerned. And that trickles down to our students. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. I think Joe was really right about talking about the interventionist program as a very easy to grasp example, right, of like where a budget cut could happen, but why it's such an important thing to keep. And I know at my kids' school there was a regular ad interventionist for the, well, I don't know if the first time ever, but the first time this past year, who was identified by my son as one of his most trusted adults in the school. That woman who's working across all the grade levels. And the impact that makes in some of the more chaotic classrooms, or not that any of the classrooms, that's chaotic is the wrong word, but you know, in some of the higher energy classrooms, to have somebody who is able to work with those kids is just an incredibly hard to put a number on. Is there anything else we should look at with regard to the budget tonight, or does anyone have additional questions?
I have one thought, it might be like way too early for this, but I'm thinking if we were to go to referendum in the spring of '24, is the annual meeting the last, like, besides our regular board meetings, like the last, like, kind of like big budget meeting we have before then? There's one in January?
Our school district does something that's not required by statute, and really it's fairly unique. We also have a mid-year budget hearing, typically the second Monday in January. But I can tell you that budget discussions will be a lot more robust than they have been as we lead up to that point, Dominique. To go to referendum, the board would need to pass a resolution. And that certainly isn't something that we would all of a sudden throw on an agenda and ask the board to approve. So you'll hear about the budget in June. I'm sure you'll hear about the budget leading up to the annual meeting with whatever happens in Madison. Then we'll have the annual meeting in August. Then the board will consider the budget in October. So I would say most of the discussion will happen here in the boardroom, other than the mid-year budget hearing in January. But that's not to say that an additional hearing or additional information session couldn't be put together depending on what we feel we need to do once we know more about the state budget.
And what would be the good time for us to like do a resolution? Like end of this year?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to, we've already been looking at the timeline for referendum. It's detailed in statute that is it 60 days, Leah? I can't.
I think it's 70 days.
Yeah, there's a certain number of days that the board has to approve the resolution prior to the election. So we haven't gotten that far yet. And again, until we actually see what the state's going to do, it's just a little bit premature, even though I think the percentage chance of us going to referendum next spring is very, very high. I think it would be jumping the gun until we know what the biennial budget is to really get that formal with it. But we are starting to put together timelines already, and I would anticipate, yeah, by end of December, early January. But the board also, I mean, as long as you brought it up, you know, that's something board members, you may want to continue to investigate on your own a little bit, because there are different times that the board can go to referendum. Depending on what's on the ballot, I know some superintendents have talked about trying to go as early as February. Planning-wise, April is getting pretty late, and that's something we've talked about in our administrative meetings. You know, when we talk about, you know, technology devices, when we talk about our staffing plan, our compensation plan, I mean, think back to this past year and kind of look at the timelines we followed there. If we don't go to referendum until April, and then we have to do a staffing plan, and then we have to do, you know, Kevin's maintenance plan, and we have to do all that stuff, that's really going to compress things. And especially with supply chain issues and staffing shortages, it is a bit of a risk to wait that long. So, you know, board members, like I said, you know, maybe continue to investigate on your end, think about it, and you can expect to hear from us a lot more in the coming months.
Piggybacking on that, at this year's WASB convention in January, I attended several workshops on the topic of referendums and on the topic of the budget bill and the budgeting process, and I saved some of the PowerPoints. I think I'm allowed to share them, but I can send those to Joe to share to the rest of the board if that is helpful. I found the workshops to be incredibly valuable. Regarding the mid-year budget hearing, this is something that's obviously a ways away to talk about, but that has typically just been like an additional mini board meeting in this room, right, kind of before the regular board meeting.
Yes.
And that's something that if we did feel like we needed to be spending some time and energy making a case to the public or engaging in a more interactive process, that could maybe be changed to a different style of meeting.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things we could do.
Yeah.
I was part of a referendum in Cassville, a 7-year operating referendum, and I can tell you it was several meetings, and we passed. And then in Cadott, we had a building referendum, and I think we had maybe 30 meetings where I went to everywhere in the community that I could, you know, community centers, all sorts of places, people's living rooms. That's the kind of stuff it would take. So don't feel like it would just be the mid-year budget hearing and that's it. It'd be a lot more than that.
Okay. Are we on to the next agenda item? Or did we? Okay. All right. Discuss cash defeasance of long-term debt. And Joe is going to start by defining defeasance.
Okay. What this comes down to is that Leah has done a great job, her and her team, working with Baird Finance Department, also the work that we've done together. We've been able to save the school district millions of dollars on the long-term debt that we have. In fact, when you look at what was shared with residents for the 2013 referendum, we've saved almost $8 million compared to what the residents ended up voting for and passing here in the school district. When you look at the history, Just recently, we saved $238,000 by prepaying debt in March of 2022. In 2020, through refinancing and debt prepayment, along with the 2017 refinancing, we reduced future interest costs by $3.3 million at that time. The original 2013 referendum financing plan was finalized in 2015 at an interest cost that was about $3.6 million less than the planning estimates that were used for the community discussions pre-referendum. So we really worked hard to try to put our taxpayers first in how we handle our long-term debt. What's coming to the board tonight is the next example of that. Through our budgeting process, we do have $2.1 million in Fund 39, which is our long-term debt fund, that we can use to prepay debt. And by doing that, we can achieve a savings of $543,000 in future interest cost reduction. So this is something, like I said, that Leah has been working on with Brian Brewer, our financial advisor at R.W. Baird. Leah, that's the summary. Are there any details that I missed?
Not really. We will take that 2.1 million and put that into an escrow account, and that will sit there, and then when it's callable in 2028, that will be applied.
So that's what the defeasance is. But what it would require is that we do have the bond attorneys working on language. The board will have to approve a resolution at the next meeting. We have not been provided that language yet, but basically it sets up the financing plan for us to achieve this savings. I think it's a good idea. Anybody?
Could you just highlight if there are any negatives to this? Looking at it, it's kind of obvious that, yes, we would like to save that money, aside from maybe interest not earned while sitting in escrow. Is there any danger or potential downfalls to moving forward with this?
That's a really good question, and the only thing that comes to my mind is if interest rates dropped to near zero, perhaps it would have been better not to do this. That is not what's being projected.
And our financial advisor, Baird, is really on top of that, and they really take all that into consideration when they bring forward these types of transactions. So,
Thanks. All right, next on the discussion agenda is legislative advocacy.
So board members, I didn't receive anything other than what I shared with you. The highlight for me, though, is the video from the Wisconsin Association of Business Officials. The link to that video is in the public section of board docs, and I also shared it on the school district social media pages. I do plan to share it out with my family message this week as well, at least a portion of it. It is the best I've seen in my, 17 years or whatever this is, of a way to explain to the general person how school funding works, and it explains why school districts like us, who have done such a good job with our finances over the years, are facing deficits now. It is a structural problem. The video shows that very well. I think that's really important. In terms of the advocacy piece of this, the video does have a call for action at the end of the video, as does a lot of the information that we're receiving from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, from the Wisconsin Association of District Administrators, same thing with WASBO, the business officials. Everyone is saying that now is the time because they are getting very close to working on the educational portion of the budget. So, board members, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add or if you have any questions.
I just wanted to say, so on a personal level, I'm not speaking to the board, just on a personal level, I plan on reaching out to all the Joint Finance Committee members this week. And also, I'm going to try to write a letter to the editor for the Telegram, just on my own behalf, about some of these topics. So, again, I don't claim to speak for the board, I'm not just a personal outreach, just let you know. And if anyone wants to, for their own personal sake, reach out in a similar way, I'd be happy to talk offline about that. And, I'll submit one to Steve too if they'll take it since he's in the back, or local media.
But the state is still projected to finish the budget, the biennial budget, with a $6.9 billion surplus. 6.9 billion. And like we've talked about, I think the state's decision to have schools use federal COVID money to operate the past 2 years, I do see the rationale in doing that, and I think it has really benefited our state. I just hope that state legislators fill that gap and provide us with an inflationary increase that allows us to continue on the path of providing our kids with the best education possible.
I just wanted to say that I thought the video was great, and I'm really glad to see that you're going to share it broadly. That's part of what we're talking about, and making sure we let the public understand where we're at.
I think as individual board members, I'm sort of thinking we share all of the things that are going on in our district's social media page, share them to my contacts, copy and paste Abe's letters to all of the joint finance committee members. There's a lot of things that hopefully could be easy asks for each of us to keep doing, and for each of us to keep asking our friends and our colleagues and our social circles to do as well. Other comments on legislative advocacy? All right, review of extracurricular staff contracts.
This is just a standing report for the board. You can see that now that we're just about through the school year, 8 more days with our students. Action is pretty limited, just a few spring activities.
There's no questions on that. Items related to the next meeting, dates, board, committees, and reports. This Wednesday, we have a retirement mixer, 4 p.m. at the middle school, to honor all our retirees. High school graduation on Saturday. Sunday, the 28th, no school. Next Monday, Memorial Day. June 2nd will be the last day of school for students. June 12th, we have our regular board meeting, and June 26th, we have our special board meeting. And don't forget the links at the bottom. There are upcoming events and webinars from WASB that you can access down there.
Are we doing a board retreat this summer?
What was that? Do I answer that question?
It's really the pleasure of the board.
If I'm not mistaken, I think there's a policy that is we have to have one at least once a year. I thought there was something like that, but I don't know for sure.
Should Rachel and I take a look at that, and we can discuss and bring something back to the board in June?
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for bringing that up.
Rachel, if I could, in terms of the upcoming dates and such, we'll post it on the door, but beginning June 5th, the ASC will be moving to summer hours. So that'll be posted on the door. This building is shut down, and actually most of our buildings are shut down on Fridays during the summer, and then it'll start back up in August, with the middle of August. So that information will be going out this week as well.
Thank you. And do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay. Motion by Amy, second by Karen.